See how that goes. My name's Julia Doctoroff, and today I'm going to speaking with you about CPQ and sort of starting on your CPQ implementation journey. I've been working with Salesforce for about 6 years now. I started as an admin at a company in San Francisco, where I'm from, and then I've moved over to the consulting side. So I'm currently working in London as a consultant at Make Positive. And I have a few certifications, and if you want to follow me on Twitter, you're welcome to do that. I'm sometimes active. So what are we going to talk about today? We'll start off with what is CPQ. Some of us might not have heard about it. It's an acronym that kind of intimidates people, so we'll go over that. Then I'll do a demo of some of my favorite CPQ features that are not that hard to build out and hopefully give you some confidence in building them yourselves. Then I'll talk about some of my best practices from doing real implementations. And then I'll share some resources so you guys can go back to your own orgs or companies and start learning more about CPQ and getting on your CPQ building journey, which I know is going to be fun for you. So what is CPQ? So again, it's an acronym, which is a little bit overwhelming. It stands for Configure, Price, Quote. And I'll sort of spell that out for you. I think it's helpful to understand that CPQ is always, when I've known it, in the context of sales and extending Sales Cloud in terms of sort of solidifying and bulking out your quoting process. So configure stands for when you're sort of putting together a quote, the different products that you put together and sort of the business logic that goes along with how those products work together so that the salesperson doesn't have to remember all of these business rules in their head. Pricing is the single source of truth for pricing, which can be really helpful for lots of organizations and makes it so that people don't have to do number crunching at their desks or in Excel or on calculators. And then quoting is the actual output, the document of all the quote and the quote lines, the things you're selling, and outputting them into a PDF or another format and getting your customer to potentially sign that with an e-signature tool. So that's kind of a very high-level overview of CPQ. And I really like this image because I don't think it makes sense, but it's what comes up when you do a Google image search for Salesforce CPQ. And I thought it was just worth adding because it's really special. So anyone that knows me knows I really like the movie Clueless, so I will try to incorporate it into any slide deck I do, regardless of how not relevant it is. But this is to represent how companies can feel sort of overwhelmed by the sales process. So why might a company choose to use CPQ? And the first one sounds pretty obvious. You're selling products, you're selling things. You want to make sure that people are all selling the same things. Sounds pretty clear, right? But anyone who's worked with a sales organization knows that people like to do things in Excel, and different salespeople have their own methods. And when you're using Excel, you can kind of do whatever you want. So this is to really standardize the products that a company is selling. You also want to standardize the quoting process, both for that salesperson, the steps that they need to follow to get to a quote for a customer, and the steps that the customer gets on their side when they're going through the sales cycle with a salesperson. Both of these together, I think, take a lot of the ambiguity out of CPQ for you, out of a sales process rather, and make it so that salespeople can kind of focus on selling and not focus on all of the sort of small details that CPQ covers for you. And another reason that a company might use CPQ is if they use really complex pricing. So you can think about subscriptions that maybe ramp up or ramp down, or if you have a really complex things that you're selling. So a company that I was working with was a big logistics company, and they did international moves for sort of high-level executives. And if you think about what's involved in a quote for that, it would be a lot of different products. And then the types of transportation that you would take would have different amounts, the size of the stuff they were having, different container sizes. If you think about just two cities, like London to Paris, that move, that's pretty complicated. And if you add a huge amount of more cities, then it gets really, really complicated. And you can think of all the different sort of pricing models that you could have. So if you think about a company that might have an entire team devoted to pricing, it might be a good candidate for CPQ. But you might not be a company that's going to be using CPQ. You might want to be learning it yourself. So I learned it because I was on a project and I was sort of forced to learn it, and I had to sort of just jump in. And after I did that project, I got my CPQ certification. And I've been really surprised with the reaction that people have had to getting that certification. So people who use CPQ every day in their day-to-day jobs, who are maybe working at a company that uses CPQ, who have been on multiple CPQ projects, people who are maybe both sides of the architect pyramid complete, have been really impressed by that. And I think there's quite a lot of imposter syndrome associated with CPQ, maybe because it involves math, maybe because it's an acronym, or it just has that reputation. So because of that, it's very impressive to people to know CPQ. There's not that many people in the ecosystem who know it, and it can make you really desirable as a job candidate. Also, if you're an admin, it's pretty much mostly configuration. So it's something you can pretty easily pick up if you feel like learning it. So that's pretty cool. Also, I would say sort of as you get further into Salesforce and into the ecosystem and you start to feel comfortable with some of the core clouds like sales and service, it's kind of fun to learn the sort of out there clouds like CPQ or Field Service Lightning just for your own learning, and so that when people talk about it, you're like, oh, I know what that is. I can do that. So it's very helpful in that way. And then finally, I think because of all of the sort of hype about CPQ and, oh, it's so hard to use, that when you get it working and it's doing what you want it to do, it's really fun. It can be very gratifying. So I've been talking a little bit about a logistics company, which it's kind of interesting. I was on a real project with a logistics company, but wouldn't it be fun if I was on a project with a spa? That would be really fun. And our client, again, is back to Clueless, is this woman named Cher Horowitz, and she's really stressed out. And she is wanting a quote for a spa package. And so she's going to want a lot of different products included in that spa package. And we're going to use CPQ to kind of figure out how to quote that to her. So let me jump. I'm glad that I have this with the Wi-Fi issues. So CPQ is a managed package, meaning that you install it and all of the CPQ functionality comes into your org. And so there's quotes, which are a little bit different than Salesforce quotes. They're a CPQ specific object. And you have products. And the product that we're going to mostly be focusing on is a product bundle. So a product bundle is sort of a group of products that you get to make choices about. So this one is a whole spa package experience called the Detox Experience. And when we add this, when we're speaking with the customer, Cher, on the phone, we're going to get to figure out what choices she wants to make. And when the salesperson, when I'm going through this, I want someone to always have to make those choices. With a lot of things in CPQ, I find reading the documentation really confusing, and I think the best way to learn it is to actually do it hands-on. Like, for example, these settings, configuration type and configuration event, you can read about them like 100 times, and until you do it, it doesn't really, for me at least, it didn't click. Within a product bundle, and this will all make a little bit more sense when we're actually looking at a quote too, but I just want to show you the back end. So we have features, which are like categories of different types of products that we're going to make choices on. So you can see we're going to have to make a choice for massage and facial, and we get to order the way that we want these categories or features to show up. And I'm adding spaces between these numbers so that if I wanted to add in more features later, I could pop those in. So we're going to look at one of these features. This one is for massage, and I want someone, when they're doing the detox experience, they have to choose at least one massage product. And this was very fun to do because I got to learn about lots of different types of treatments you can get. So you could choose, at least these are the different options or choices, product options that someone would choose. And these are all related records. And you can see these also have an order that they go in, and I'm keeping space in there in case I want to add in more later. So now if we go down to one of the features, come on. It's the problem with not clicking on it. Yep, that one. So cucumber water, you can see that this is what one of the product options looks like, or one of the choices for types of refreshments. And this one is going to be automatically selected because when someone goes to the spa, you kind of assume they're going to get that. And we're going to bundle that because we're not going to charge someone for cucumber water. It's a little bit ridiculous when they're spending a lot of money on all these treatments. So There, great. There's also ways to add in business logic. So a product rule is one way that you can sort of add business logic within this product bundle. And this, again, will all make a little bit more sense when we see it but it's good to kind of see this part first. So this one is when someone is choosing one of the salon products, we're automatically going to add another product because we're assuming if they're at the place for a while, they're going to maybe get hungry. And you can see that the theme of my demo becomes that I was really hungry while I was doing this because all of my rules are related to that. So this is the product rule, and then the related records that relate to this filter condition, which is going to say kind of what the error conditions are going to be like, has related records. So it kind of becomes a theme in CPQ. There's lots of records that describe what you're doing. So the configuration rule just says where this product rule applies, and it applies on this particular bundle that we're currently looking at, the detox experience. And the error conditions just say when the product options, so other products we're adding, if they equal haircut or blowout or color, then we want to automatically add in one additional product, which is the macrobiotic lunch, which is what they get automatically. They can deselect it if they want, but we're going to sort of suggest it so the salesperson remembers that. So that's doing that automatically for the salesperson. We also can do price rules. It's another way to add business logic. I'm not going to go into the related records on this one, but whenever Salesforce describes how price rules work, they describe price rules as injecting a value into a quote or a quote line field, which just kind of means putting a value there. So this one is going to do kind of a calculation for us. It's going to, when somebody chooses lemon bars and teapots, it's going to set the quantity of lemon bars to 2 times the quantity of teapots. So it's kind of updating those quantities for you. And we'll see that in action. It'll make a little bit more sense. And again, with price rules, the best way to learn them is to just play around with them and create some and see how they work. So now we're on a quote. So we're sort of in the salesperson's shoes now. And we can see that this quote is the primary quote, which means that it's quote lines, once we add those, are going to sync over to the opportunity that's related. I've already created an opportunity and an account related to this particular quote. So when we go into edit lines, this is what kind of takes us into the CPQ process. This first part that we're doing is the configuration part. And when I click add products, you can probably guess that I'm going to add the product that we've been talking about a lot, which is the detox experience. I'm going to select that, and then we'll get into this configuration screen, which has the product bundle that we're used to seeing. So we see the feature massage and facial, and we see all these product options here. So we're going to choose one of the massage options, and we could update the quantity if we wanted to. We also can add in a facial option, and so these are our features and product options. And we can see that the cucumber water, like we expected, is automatically selected. When I add in a salon product, I'm expecting the lunch product to add in automatically. So that's our product rule firing right there. And then I'm expecting our price rule to not fire now, but when we add in the paleo lemon bars and the herbal teapots, I had fun with these names, and this updates to 2. It's not going to update now because our price rule is going to fire when we save the whole quote, but we're expecting the lemon bars to update to 4. Now, when we choose a nail treatment, we see that I have another option to configure. And this is a nested bundle. So it's a bundle within a bundle because we have choices of the types of manicures we can get. And so you can see that we can choose a option here, and that'll be an additional product to upgrade. And we can click save. Typically with nested bundles, I wouldn't recommend going more than a few layers because people start to get a little bit confused about where they started. So when we click save now, that'll take us to being outside the configuration. We'll get to see our quote lines, and we can see all the pricing that's happened here. And we can see that the price rule fired to update that paleo lemon bars quantity to 4, so 2 times 2. And we can also see that the cucumber water is bundled, so there's no price on it. And there's a lot of different settings that you can choose for each product option. Those are just a couple of them. And so the last stage, we've done the C and the P. We're going to do the quote. So we're going to go to generate document because we actually want to send this to our customer. And I've put together a very basic template here. I've done very little customization just to show you that you don't have to do that much customization. It's all configuration. So I can choose to save and email this, or send an email rather, to the customer. But for right now, I'm just going to preview it because I just want to make sure it looks right. And the only things that I've changed on this particular quote template are I've added in a logo, and I've changed one of the line items for product name. I've added in a column there. And if you wanted to, you can make this a very dynamic template. So you can have different columns be hidden based on different values on the quote. You can have entire tables or lines separated out into different groups. So there's a lot of different things you can do with it, and it's all config. So that's pretty straightforward to just show you that it's pretty easy to get that quote document, and you could obviously spend quite a bit more time making this look more professional and polished and branded. Cool. So I'm going to click cancel now, and then that's kind of going to conclude our quoting process with Cher Horowitz to kind of get you into understanding kind of what CPQ can do, and hopefully it gave you kind of an overview of some of the things that are possible and how it's definitely achievable to do a lot of those things and to do even more advanced logic. So that's obviously not a real scenario, but I wanted to share some of my real-world best practices for working on a CPQ project. So the first one, it again goes back to the product catalog. Having a really clear idea of what the product catalog is going to make sure that the rest of the logic that you add in suits that and really makes sense for your company. Whenever I've worked on a CPQ project, I think sort of it makes a company evaluate the entire sort of sales process and the entire sense of what the company does and what they stand for. So I think it can often be a very long requirements gathering, whether you work internally or you're a consultant. So it's definitely worth it to spend that time making sure you really understand what you're doing, because it's really all in well to go in and just build a bunch of stuff. But if people aren't really doing what's the correct business process, it's not that useful. So I would definitely make sure you do that. I would also start simple. It's really easy to do a lot of automation in CPQ and do a lot of these product rules and price rules, and there's tons of other features that I didn't even talk about. But I think it's also worth it to just start sort of out of the box and see how it goes, and then add on functionality once you've had maybe a short pilot phase and sort of gotten some of the salespeople on board with CPQ. It can be really helpful, and it might save you time down the line, because it doesn't mean you can't add all the bells and whistles, but maybe don't do it all right away. I would also, I know it's very Salesforce to say to avoid code, but I really mean it in this case. CPQ is a managed package, and if you're adding a huge amount of custom code to CPQ and you're finding that there's so many limitations of what CPQ can offer you, it might be a time to think about whether CPQ is the right solution for what you're trying to do, because it doesn't always work well with huge amounts of code. I would also expect longer deployments. So all of the stuff that we just looked at is data. So those product rules and price rules, those are records. All of those are records, which means that we can't use traditional deployment methods. There's a tool that I know some people have used. I haven't personally used it. It's called Prodly Mover, and people really like it. You don't like it? Oh, yeah. So it can be pretty manual, a lot of this stuff, and there's a lot of different relationships. There's a huge data model for CPQ, so it can be really, really complex. So definitely make sure you keep that in mind, or think about using these tools that are paid. So definitely something to keep in mind. I would also test with larger data volumes, and not just large amounts of records, but large amounts of quote lines, because it definitely has limits. Salesforce doesn't always necessarily tell you the exact limits, and that's why you kind of need to play around and really do strong testing on making sure that CPQ can do what you want it to do, and to really make sure you test those limits with representative data volumes. It's really, really important. And then finally, I think This is not at all meant to scare you, all of these, but you can trust yourself. It's definitely possible. I think there's a lot of, again, as I've said, like there's a lot of sort of imposter syndrome with CPQ, but it's just mostly config, so you guys can do it. And if you're feeling sort of stressed out, or maybe like, oh, I don't belong in the CPQ building world, think about getting the certification to sort of make yourself feel more grounded in CPQ. And I think whenever you're learning a new cloud, to sort of try to relate it to things that you already know, like, oh, that's like a validation rule, that kind of thing can be really, really helpful. I put together a trail mix for everyone. It's mostly the CPQ modules that are available on Trailhead, which are really helpful and didn't exist when I first started using CPQ. And then I would also recommend the Salesforce 9 to 5 blog. It's written by this woman, Yelena. I think she's based in the US. And she has some really great resources. She's one of the only people who blogs about CPQ. And she has some really, really great resources for the certification. She has, I think, a practice exam and some study guides, and they're really, really helpful. And I think that is everything. Does anyone have any questions for me? Yes. I personally have not used other CPQs. When I took the CPQ course, I know that Salesforce CPQ has many less objects than Aptus. Like, I think it's less complicated. I think that I've heard from people that like a lot of the products are quite similar in like what they do, but I think some of them can be more involved and more complicated. I'm not sure if other people have used other ones. I've only used the Salesforce one.
Talking about other products, so there are other CPQ type products out there. Julia, to talk about limitations, there is a real limitation piece when it comes
Yeah.
to CPQ. But then question yourself about this, and I did fall over this myself when I implemented as well. There is a hard line of about 300 lines on a quote page, at which point it will bomb out. We will not be able to create a quote. So when you saw the nice pretty quote and you're going to have 300 lines of products, it will bomb out. You will not be able to pass it out there. But question yourself, who in their right mind, as a customer, wants 300 lines of quotes of products?
Yeah.
So if you're going to that sort of level of detail, think about what you're doing. Now, we went there, we broke it, properly broke it. We were throwing out loads and loads of stuff. At which point are you going too granular with your product lines that you're showing? So think about your data model, think about your
Yeah.
products before you go on this journey. And Julia is right as well. When you start these sort of journeys as well, you are looking at your sales process. You should be looking at your products. If you don't look at these things, you are going to break it. And I think it's a great opportunity to really shape this stuff out. So
Yeah.
house, don't take everything with you.
Yeah, and I think that like on that same point, that's a great point, Amanda. I think just not making CPQ fit into necessarily your existing very complicated sales process, instead trying to use CPQ for what it is. And if that isn't the right product for you, that's okay. I'm not a salesperson.
Other products might be able to take
Yeah.
a realistic.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I think it's very true. And there are definitely hard limits for a lot of things. So definitely making sure that it is the right product for you is a great first step. Yeah, go ahead.
Your example is quite simple. It seems simple.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And as far as I understand that it goes through the invoice. Right?
Yeah. So you can do invoicing. Yeah.
What about delivery chain if you want to connect it to e-commerce?
So you could do that. I haven't personally done that. Yeah, there's a whole piece at the end of the cycle with like renewals and subscriptions and assets and all that stuff that I have not included in this. But yeah, and it can be involved with other platforms as well. So yeah, that's definitely possible. Yeah. No, this was just to kind of give people a taste of kind of some of the basic features. But yeah, you can definitely make it a longer sort of end-to-end cycle for sure. Any other questions? Okay, cool. Thanks so much, guys.